was actually engaged in the nefarious activity of negotiating with governments in South and Central America and bringing orphans to the United States, street urchins off the streets of, Rio and Maracaibo and Santiago and in Mexico City and other, Latin American capitals, and bringing the kids up here and involving them essentially as guinea pigs, as expendable people. But if they survived the defense research and development activities they were involved in, they would then be adopted into American households and receive everything they needed as children, namely a roof over their head and food and clothing and education and love and so forth. So part of the story of Pegasus is the fact that, and that the people of Latin America should know and in a way take pride in, is that the first child teleportees to experience teleportation and to contribute to the evolution of quantum access in the early 1970s were actually unfortunate children from Latin America who the U.S. government essentially contracted with Latin American governments to bring to the United States and use in experiments. And of course that went unnoticed in New Mexico because New Mexico has a very large Spanish American population. So if there was a child, for example, with black hair, they were just presumed to be a Spanish or Native American, native of New Mexico. But in fact, many of those kids being taken on and off of defense labs and military bases in New Mexico were street urchins off poor, unfortunate kids who were homeless and living on the streets of metropolitan areas in Latin American cities. I was in the third group. My dad said I was the first American child to teleport because he took me on those early jumps from Curtis Wright before I was even officially in the project. And he said I was probably about the 20th or the 25th child to teleport. So I don't take any credit to being a time-space pioneer in that sense of literally being the first. Certainly I was the first American child to teleport, but I was, as he said, probably the 20th or 25th or so human child to teleport. That credit goes to the kids from Latin America who were involved before me. So by the time that I was teleporting to Santa Fe in summer of 70, they had already found that the technology was relatively safe, even for children. Now, the Navy guys had been lost because they asphyxiated. There was also an incident when I was jumping to Santa Fe later in 1971, where one of the children from another school, indeed from another teleport, arrived in Santa Fe standing in 3 inches of water in a public fountain that had been leaking in the state capitol complex, and he lost his feet. He basically arrived standing in that fountain and slid off his ankles. Now, some of the kids were doing weird stuff when we were in the Vortal Tunnel, just like on an amusement park ride. They would try to move their bodies around and sort of go tumble and sort of the zero-G type effects of the Vortal Tunnel. But I would just do what I was told, which is I had been told to jump through the teleport like I was carrying a football through a window, holding my midsection sort of bunched up and jump through it. So I would remain in that position until we found footfall in Santa Fe. And what I suspect that this child did is he must have somehow altered his physical position when he was in the Vortal Tunnel, because he arrived at a weird angle and actually popped into view in the fountain. So something may have gone awry, either because of how he moved when he was in the Vortal Tunnel or some distortion of the tunnel itself. But when I ran past his location, I could see that he was writhing on the ground with just stumps where his feet should be.
Oh my, it's awful.
Screaming, my feet, I'm only 9 years old. What am I going to do without any feet? And there were already 3 team leaders there. The man was holding him down to the ground, and there were 2 women with walkie-talkies there, because these team leaders were obviously in different locations around the state capitol complex. And one of the women saw that I had saw the child with his feet gone, and that I had looked into the fountain. I saw his red kid sneakers with his feet and the stumps of his ankles releasing a small rivulet of oxygen and blood up to the surface of the fountain. They were right below the water. They were just right in the 3 inches of water. And I was obviously shocked at what I was looking at, but she grabbed me by the shoulders and ran me away from this scene of mayhem, shouting in my ear, "You didn't see this, Andy. It didn't happen. You didn't see this. It didn't happen." Like reinforcing that concept. And then I was taken to a doctor's office in Santa Fe where they gave me a big, rather painful injection in my left buttocks and some kind of sedative. And then my dad arrived after an hour or two and took me down We just hung out in the restaurant with Connie. So it was dangerous experimental activity, and I wasn't immediately injured. I believe that my health was undermined by the process. But one of the children did have a catastrophic injury and unfortunately lost his feet. And then I had a discussion with my dad about whether that could happen to me, and he said, yes, theoretically it could happen, but we know it doesn't happen to you because we've looked through the chronovisor at images of you, and we found you doing things in your late 80s. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, you're still working. You're still practicing. I think he said practicing law. I think he tipped off that I was a lawyer. He said, you're still going about your career. He said something like that, and giving lectures and stuff, and when you're in your late 80s. Okay, so we know that you... I go, well, what does that mean? He goes, well, we know you survived the project with all of your parts. But unfortunately for this child, he lost his feet. So...
Do you want to talk a little bit about the Battle of Gettysburg?
Well, before going on to that, I want to complete my answer to your question in the sense that...
Okay.
So we were experimentees. Okay. The second thing we were is what I call necessities, with a double E. Like teleportees, we were necessities.
Cute. Okay.
And that is because the hologram that was propagated by the chronovisors was very vulnerable to collapse when they first started working with us. And so if we were told that when an adult would stand on the stage when the hologram had either been tuned in already or was then tuned in around the person, it would frequently collapse immediately because the size, the respiration, the blood pressure, the heartbeat of an adult would simply cause too much vibration and would collapse the hologram in the chronovisor. So they needed to train small, intelligent, cooperative children to use as the participant observers in the holograms. Because the chronovisor propagated holograms, initially three-dimensional holograms and then fourth-dimensional holograms when I was on the project. So that initially we could be in a past time, for example, as a spectral presence in that time, but not be injured there. We were just sort of visible to humans and animals in that time and place, but we were just there as a light form that could perceive things. We weren't physically there. But then ultimately they were using the chronovisors to literally insert us in past events where we could eat and sleep and stay there a long time and so forth, and be injured potentially.
I have a question about the chronovisor. Sorry, it was just really sudden that came to me. You said that they could look into your future and know that you've kept all your parts and so forth.
Yeah.
But is that, how do you, because there's so many different parallels and probabilities of what can happen, right? I mean, sometimes people can get a reading by a psychic, and the psychic can say, this is going to happen. That's one of the more
profound questions of what was going on Pegasus. When I was on Pegasus, they determined that the multiverse exists because when they kept on sending me or another child, for example, to the Lincoln assassination site at Ford's Theater, which I visited at least 5 or 6 times when I was there one of the summers, we were teleporting there for summers and then doing secret defense project activities there, and then we were teleporting back to New Jersey, arriving on the afternoon of the day we had left.
There's a summer activity.
So in my research of what happened to me, I identified that there were 4 hidden summers in New Mexico that I accessed during the 3 years I was in Pegasus. We did 70 and then back, 71 and then back, and then in fall of 70 we jumped to the summer of 73 and lived that in New Mexico. And then when we were sent back to 71 and then reached 72 by normal means, we then jumped and experienced a summer of 72 in New Mexico, and then that time loop closed when we jumped back to the beginning of the summer of 72 again. So during those 4 summers in those 3 years, I was involved in both teleportation-based and chronovision-based journeys, mostly to past times. And one of them was to the Lincoln speech site, and I was different things were happening to me each time they would send me to the same location. So accessing the past or future is kind of like Groundhog Day, the film with Bill Murray?
Yeah.
Of Canada.